Hey there guys, this is Mr. Herbst here, and today we're going to go ahead and do a little walkthrough of our evolution study guide. It's going to be a big test, very important to do well, a lot of information and covered in this unit, so strap on in and let's go ahead and see if we can lay down a few of these difficult concepts. The first thing, before I go any further, I want to make sure that we are comfortable with what evolution is. So if we take a look over here at all of these chickens, if we could, say, pool together all of their genes, if we're talking about all of the genes of all the chickens as a population, that's what we call a gene pool. And any time that there is a change in the gene pool is when evolution has occurred. Another way to think about it is that on my hands here, I have bacteria. You know how I know I have bacteria? It's not that I'm not a clean person, it's that I'm a human being. You have bacteria on your hands too. And so if we go ahead and consider all of the bacteria on our hands as a gene pool of all the genes of the bacteria, guess what will happen if we go ahead and use some of this stuff right here? This stuff right here says kills 99.99% of all the germs. So we're going to go ahead and squirt a little bit out there and then go ahead and rub it together. And guess what? Do you think that I'm changing the gene pool of the bacteria on my hands? Hopefully you answered yes, I am changing the gene pool. I am eliminating 99.9% of all the germs. Thus, I changed the gene pool, the collection of bacterial genes on my hands. Thus, evolution has occurred. Man, you can just feel the evolution. It's amazing. All right, so now that my hands are nice and clean, let's go ahead and work through some of these terms on our study guide. So the first part here is all about fill in the boxes. The first thing is species. What is the definition of a species? That is organisms that are capable of mating and producing fertile offspring. And so some examples of that would be like buffalo or geese or human beings or really any type of organism. And then that leads me to our next question here is what is a population? A population is a group of individuals from the same species. So oftentimes a population of a country is measured by how many humans, humans being a species, are in that country. Well, if we talk about a herd of buffalo or a gaggle of geese, yeah, that's right. A group of geese is called a gaggle. If we talk about a group of those things, that is a population of geese or a population of buffalo. What is a theory? Well, a theory is something that is tested and conclusive, and it is an explanation of observations. Really good example of a theory is gravity. We can observe gravity pretty easily. You drop something and it will fall, and gravity has been observed. But explaining how gravity happens, an explanation of gravity, is a theory. Adaptations are any traits, and traits again are phenotypes, physical traits that increases an organism's chance of survival. A bear claw, fangs, my hands are adaptations. My hands allow me to survive in my environment a lot easier. You know why? Because now I can manipulate objects and change things around me, which allow me to survive easier. Evolution, again, is simply a change in the gene pool of organisms over time. And fossils are dead and preserved organisms. Dinosaur bones are great examples of fossils. But also we find fossilized plants and all kinds of other fossilized organisms. Question number 2, who was Charles Darwin? Well, I'm going to show you a picture here. Hopefully you recognize this picture from class. This was Charles Darwin, and he was British, and he was a naturalist. He studied nature. He came up with the theory of natural selection. Describe the voyage on the HMS Beagle. The Beagle was the ship that Charles Darwin traveled around the world on. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you a picture of his voyage. He left off from Britain, went around South America. He stopped for a long time in the Galapagos Islands. He went over to New Zealand, around to Australia, around Africa, and back up to Britain. That was his voyage on the Beagle. What is artificial selection, aka selective breeding? That's where humans choose which organisms mate based on the traits we like. So for example, we do this with dogs. We like dogs that have the floppy ears or the curly tails or the coloration that we like, and so we only allow those organisms to mate together. And so it's based on the traits that we like. We also do it with chickens and cows and corn. What is natural selection? Charles Darwin, even though he came up with his theory of natural selection a long time ago, he decided that natural selection should always be compared to artificial selection. So if artificial selection is where humans choose, natural selection is where nature, quote unquote, chooses which organisms get to mate based on their ability to survive in an environment. So it's not like Mother Nature has a brain. It doesn't say, hey, I only like the ones with the blue eyes, or hey, I only like the ones with the dark skin, or hey, I only like the ones with this or that. It's all based on survival. If you can survive in an environment, then an organism will be more likely to pass along their genes. And natural selection needs four things in order to work. It needs heritability, variation, competition, or a struggle for resources, and overproduction. Hopefully this is nothing new to you. If it is, go ahead and watch my video, which will be in the description below of this video on these four things. Darwin visited a group of islands off the coast of South America. What were the islands called, and what did he observe? The islands were called the Galapagos, and organisms were reproductively isolated from the mainland South America. So because they were isolated away from everything going on in South America, creatures adapted to the island life. So we find creatures on the Galapagos that we don't find anywhere else on Earth. Explain the idea of descent with modification. Well, that's where traits are passed down from parents to offspring, but in doing so, they're sort of modified. They're not the same as the parents. And generally, when it comes to natural selection, it's modified based on which organisms survive. The ones that survive get to reproduce. However, you yourself are a descendant of your parents, but you are not exactly like your parents. You are a modification of your parents. Now on to the second page. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys a little picture to answer this question. Hopefully you remember this picture from class. But Darwin noticed that there were, the finches that he saw on the Galapagos Islands had different sized beaks that were adapted for specific food sources. So for example, the ones with the big beaks were really good at clamping down and chomping down on nuts that had thick shells, and they could get the food on the inside. The ones that had the really pointy looking beaks were better at getting bugs and better for getting nectar. JohnBaptiste Lamarck, what did he do? Summarize his ideas. Well, he sort of said that traits that are acquired during an organism's lifetime are passed down from parents to offspring. So if we take a look at this picture here, where this lady here has used these rings to stretch her neck, she acquired a long neck in her lifetime. But are her kids going to be able to inherit that long neck? The answer is no. So traits that are acquired during an organism's lifetime are not passed down from parents to offspring. So Lamarck's theories get the big F for false. This question is on the previous page. State the principle of common descent. This is where organisms are related back in time by a common ancestor. So in evolution, we claim that organisms are related to one another through previous organisms, which is called a common ancestor. Explain how two species that look very different from one another can be more closely related than species that look very similar to one another. Well, it all has to do with DNA. The more similar a DNA sequence is, the more similar two organisms are. Regardless of what they may look like on the outside, if their DNA is closer to being the same, that means that they are more similar related. Describe homologous structures. I'm going to show you guys a picture here. Hopefully you remember this picture from class. But homologous structures are where we have the same structure but different functions. A good example of that is the arm bones in mammals. And going back over here, you can see that all of these mammals have very similar bone structures in the way that the bones are associated. That indicates that they are related to one another by common ancestry. Describe analogous structures and give an example of them. Well, analogous structures are sort of the opposite of homologous structures. Analogous structures are where we have the same function but different structure. So if we compare, for example, a bird wing and an insect wing, Both of those things are structured in different ways. Insects don't have bones, but birds do. And what do those both have in common? They both have a very similar function, and that function is to fly. If we also look at a shark and a whale tails move up and down, shark tails move side to side, and they're made of different things. Whale tails are made of bones, shark tails are made of cartilage. And so what do those both have in common, though? They have a similar function. That function is to swim in the water. Darwin didn't know about genetics. How would that have helped him understand inheritance? Well, traits are inherited from parents to offspring on DNA, or genes. What are vestigial structures, and what can they tell us about an organism? They are structures that have no function in one organism, but may have a function in related organisms. We talked about in class, a really good example of this is our human appendix. The appendix is a little dangling organ on the end of your large intestine, and it doesn't do anything good for us other than get inflamed and make people go to the hospital. But in rabbits, the appendix is very important for helping them digest grass. And so it shows that because humans have this vestigial structure that has no function, it's probably got passed along through evolutionary history. And so us and rabbits are related in some way, and that relationship, you can look at the similarities. Well, we're both mammals. We're both warm-blooded. That right there is a very big similarity. There are several kinds of evidence for evolution. Fill in the table. The first thing is fossils. What does that help us to show about evolution? It shows how life has changed according to the fossil record. It shows about how old fossils look different than newer fossils. So it helps to show evolution. How does structures of organisms help to show about how evolution may have occurred? Well, it indicates common ancestry or similar environments. If organisms have similar structures, then that indicates common ancestry. But if they have different structures, but again, if they're analogous structures, that indicates similar evolutionary environments. So it shows about how maybe an organism evolved being in the same environment as another one. Embryology helps to show how organisms are more closely related. I'm going to show you guys this picture here. Again, hopefully you remember this one from class. But if you look here, the organisms that stay similar for more time, such as these mammals here, which they don't really begin to look different until their very last stages of development. That means that they are more closely related than, say, a rabbit and a fish, for example. Fish and rabbits are not too closely related. They're very different. Fish are cold-blooded, and rabbits are warm-blooded. Rabbits are mammals. Fish are fish. And so that's indicating that they have a lot of differences. So their embryos don't look the same for very long. They begin to look different much earlier on than, say, other mammals. DNA, how does that help to explain evolution? Well, similar sequences mean more closely related organisms. So just directly looking at the DNA sequence of organisms, the closer the relation is, the more closely related organisms are. The farther apart the DNA is, the farther apart the organisms are related to one another. Alrighty there, guys. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next page. We're going to talk about how old is the Earth. Well, modern science shows that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. Define the term microevolution. That is where we have small changes to the gene pool of a population. And if you recall from class, that can occur in 5 different ways. We assign each one of those ways to each finger on our hand. If you can't recall the 5 fingers of evolution, watch that video in the description of this video now. So anytime that there is a change in the gene pool, that is evolution. One of those ways is natural selection. Natural selection acts on phenotypes. What does that mean? Well, if you recall, natural selection, we assign the thumb, where natural selection favors the good phenotypes and doesn't favor the bad phenotypes. So thumbs up for good phenotypes, good traits that allow organisms to survive in a specific environment. If organisms have bad phenotypes, they get the thumbs down. And what do I mean by thumbs down? Well, eventually they will get eliminated. Eventually the environment will not allow those to survive and Mother Nature will kill them off. Define genetic drift. That is where we have random changes to the gene pool. Those random changes result in a smaller population size. So genetic drift is where we assigned our pinky, where we have random changes that result in a small population size. And so the pinky is the smallest finger, small population size. Define the term gene flow. Well, that's where genes can move in and out of the population due to migration. So if genes are moving in and out, that is easily changing the gene pool. We assign the pointer finger for that movement. The pointer finger means movement, migration, gene flow. What is the gene pool of a population? Well, hopefully by now you can kind of understand that it's a collection of all of the genes within a population. That was the first thing I talked about at the beginning of this video. If we physically separate a population of organisms over time, that may result in a new species. That happens due to geographic isolation. If two species are isolated by various things, and those various things can be water, mountains, or roads, but if those species are isolated and can never mate back and forth, if they can never exchange genes anymore, well, it just so happened that the environment over here on this side may be different than the environment over here on this side. So eventually there's going to be this selective pressure to favor certain genes over others, and eventually organisms might start to look very different over time. What are mutations and how do they affect a population's gene pool? Mutation was the middle finger, M for mutation. A mutation is any random change in the DNA of an organism. Oops, sorry, there we go, guys. Mutation is the random change in the DNA of an organism. And so anytime that we have a change in the DNA of one organism, it is going to obviously change the gene pool. That will cause evolution to occur. How can you prove that two species evolved from a common ancestor? Well, you can look at similar DNA sequences, you can look at similar embryos, you can look at similar bone structures, but the big one there is similar DNA sequences. That is scientific, near scientific proof that organisms are more closely related to others, just based on their DNA sequences. Number 30, what is the bottleneck effect? This is a type of genetic drift. The bottleneck effect is another way that we can result in a small population, the pinky. It's a random loss of many genes in the gene pool, almost all of them. And it looks like this over here on the right, where if we start out with, like, say, 1 million individuals, they're going to go through this upside down bottleneck, and eventually maybe only 2 individuals actually survive. Maybe let's say that's a volcano. Kills off most of all of the individuals in a population. If it does that, it's also killing off all of the genes within that population, and that means that only the 2 individuals are left to pass along their genes. Bottleneck effect, once again, pinky, small population size. And finally here, guys, the last thing, what is the founder effect? The founder effect is the type of migration. It's where organisms found a new land. And so if we talk about the pointer finger again, it's where organisms move around. But more specifically, only a small sample of an original population forms a new population isolated away from that original population. So it is a type of migration where a small sample of a population will go off and form a population on a new area. So if we talk about how the gene pool of all the human beings on Earth, here's my poorly drawn Earth, all of the genes of the human population are represented on Earth. But if only a small sample of them go off and live on an island somewhere, it's not possible that, say, the 10 individuals or the several individuals that live on this island will represent all of the genes from all of the human beings on Earth. That is the founder effect. That also occurs, that also is what we attributed occurred in the Galapagos Island, where just one of those types of finches flew off from the mainland and then landed on those islands and then evolved into 14 different kinds of finches that Darwin discovered. Anyway here, guys, hopefully this helps to clear things up. Again, I can't stress enough that if things on here were confusing, go back, rewind, and look at the videos that I posted in the description of this video and refresh yourself before the test for tomorrow. Anyway, guys, thanks for doing such a nice job in class. You all are doing a great job. Keep up the good work, and I will see you soon. Have a nice day.